The night Olivia Hart wandered into Blackwood Forest, she was only trying to find the trail back to her car before the storm swallowed the last traces of daylight. She never imagined that one wrong turn would change every year of her future. Then she saw him. Standing beneath the towering pine trees was a man unlike anyone she had ever met. His tailored black coat looked untouched by the pouring rain, and although thunder rolled overhead, he stood perfectly still, as though the storm itself had paused to make room for him. Their eyes met from several feet apart, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Olivia couldn't explain why her heart suddenly raced, or why every instinct that should have warned her to walk away simply disappeared. The stranger offered a quiet smile before walking toward her with calm confidence. "You're lost," he said gently. Olivia nodded, unable to find the right words. There was something strangely comforting about him, something that made her feel as though she had known him long before that night. She laughed nervously, admitting she had taken the wrong hiking trail after trying to photograph the forest before sunset. He offered to help her find shelter because the rain had already flooded the paths leading back to town. She accepted without hesitation, unaware that the man walking beside her ruled a world she didn't even know existed. The abandoned cabin they found was old enough to creak with every gust of wind, but it offered warmth from a stone fireplace that the mysterious stranger managed to light within minutes. They spent hours talking as rain battered the roof above them. Olivia spoke about wanting a quieter life after losing both parents, while the handsome stranger spoke very little about himself, saying only that he carried responsibilities that rarely allowed him peace. He never revealed his family name, never mentioned the enormous estate hidden miles away beyond the mountains, and certainly never admitted that hundreds of loyal wolves answered to his command. Instead, he listened. Really listened. For the first time in years, Olivia felt completely seen. Every laugh came naturally. Every glance lingered longer than the last. Outside, the storm continued to roar, but inside that lonely cabin, two strangers slowly forgot the world beyond its walls. As midnight arrived, silence settled between them, yet it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence shared only by two people who already understood each other without needing many words. When Ethan gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from Olivia's face, she didn't step back. Instead, she leaned closer. Their first kiss felt effortless, as though it had been waiting for both of them long before either was born. One unforgettable night became the beginning of a love neither of them expected, a memory that would refuse to let either heart move on. By sunrise, everything changed. Olivia woke to an empty cabin, believing the mysterious man had quietly left while she was asleep. His coat was gone. The fireplace had grown cold. The only proof he had ever been there was the faint scent of cedarwood that still lingered in the room. Hurt, but determined not to dwell on someone whose last name she didn't even know, Olivia quietly gathered her belongings and walked back toward civilization. She never looked behind her. What she didn't know was that Ethan had returned to the forest only minutes after leaving. Before dawn, he had heard distant howls echoing through the mountains and had rushed away to stop a violent conflict threatening his pack. He believed Olivia would still be asleep when he returned. Instead, he found an empty cabin and footprints disappearing into the wet earth. He searched every trail for hours, calling out for the woman whose name had already become impossible to forget. There was no answer. The scent of rain had washed away every trace she left behind. For the first time in centuries, the powerful Alpha King felt something close to panic. He had finally found the woman his wolf had chosen, only to lose her before learning where she lived. That morning became the first day of a search that would consume the next 3 years of his life. What neither of them realized was that fate had already tied their lives together forever. Only weeks after returning home, Olivia began feeling unusually exhausted. At first, she blamed stress. Then came the nausea. Then came the doctor's appointment that completely changed everything. She was pregnant. The news left her speechless. She replayed every moment from that unforgettable night, remembering the mysterious man whose smile had stayed with her long after the storm ended. She searched online using every detail she could remember about him, but she found nothing. She returned to Blackwood Forest several times hoping she might see him again, yet the cabin remained empty each visit, almost as though it had never been occupied at all. Eventually, she accepted the painful possibility that the man she had fallen for was simply gone. Instead of allowing heartbreak to define her, Olivia made a promise to herself and the tiny life growing inside her. She would become the strongest mother she possibly could. She worked longer hours, moved into a smaller apartment to save money, and prepared for motherhood without expecting anyone else's help. Every night before sleeping, she would gently place a hand over her growing stomach and whisper stories to the baby she hadn't yet met. She had no idea that far away, the baby's father had assembled investigators, private security teams, trusted allies, and every member of his ancient wolf pack with one impossible command: find the woman from the storm before it's too late. 3 years passed, but neither heart truly healed. Ethan Blackwood had built one of America's most successful business empires, yet every achievement felt hollow. Every city he visited became another opportunity to continue searching. Every charity gala, every airport, every hotel lobby, every crowded street became another place where he secretly hoped to catch a familiar smile. His closest advisors urged him to stop chasing someone he barely knew, but they didn't understand what he felt. His wolf recognized Olivia as his destined mate the moment their eyes met in the forest, a bond stronger than logic itself. Meanwhile, Olivia devoted every moment of her life to raising her beautiful daughter, Lily. She often smiled whenever Lily laughed, unaware that the little girl's unusually sharp hearing, remarkable sense of smell, and glowing silver eyes during moments of excitement weren't ordinary childhood traits. Strange things happened around Lily that Olivia couldn't explain. Dogs never barked at her. Wild deer approached her without fear. Once, after falling asleep during a family camping trip, tiny paw prints appeared around her sleeping bag despite there being no animals nearby. Olivia dismissed each incident as coincidence because the alternative was impossible to believe. She simply loved her daughter with all her heart, never imagining the extraordinary truth hidden inside the little girl she had spent 3 years protecting from the world. Engage in our comment section and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Drop your location below. And subscribe now so you never miss any of our new videos, because what happened next would answer questions that had remained buried for years while introducing mysteries neither Olivia nor Ethan could have imagined. One believed she had been forgotten forever. The other refused to stop searching, convinced that somewhere, somehow, the woman from the storm was still alive. Neither of them knew that destiny had already brought them closer than ever before. Only a few miles separated them now, and the next decision Olivia made would place her directly inside the home of the very man she believed she had lost forever. She wasn't searching for love anymore. She was only searching for work. But sometimes the smallest decision becomes the one that changes everything. The following Monday morning, Olivia stood outside the towering iron gates of Blackwood Manor with one small suitcase, a folded employment letter in her hand, and Lily holding tightly onto her fingers. The estate stretched farther than the eye could see, surrounded by ancient forests, perfectly trimmed gardens, sparkling fountains, and stone walls that looked as though they had guarded secrets for centuries. Olivia had heard people describe the billionaire owner as one of the wealthiest and most private men in America, but she had never cared much about wealthy people. She only cared about finding stable work so she could give Lily the life she deserved. After months of unpaid bills, rejected job applications, and nights spent wondering how she would afford another month of rent, the housekeeping position at Blackwood Manor felt like the answer to every prayer she had whispered. She adjusted Lily's backpack, smiled reassuringly at her daughter, and walked through the gates without realizing that every step brought her closer to the one man she had never truly forgotten. At that very moment, several wolves hidden throughout the surrounding forest suddenly lifted their heads toward the mansion. Their sharp senses caught a familiar scent carried gently by the morning breeze. Within seconds, silent messages spread across the estate through instincts older than language itself. The king's mate had returned. Inside the manor, Ethan Blackwood sat at the head of a long conference table surrounded by executives discussing billion-dollar investments, Yet his attention suddenly drifted elsewhere. His expression changed so quickly that the entire room fell silent. A scent reached him through the open balcony doors, one he had searched for across cities, countries, and continents. His heart pounded once, then again, harder than it had in years. He slowly stood from his chair, ignoring the confused faces around him. Every instinct inside him urged him to run outside immediately, but years of discipline held him back. He walked calmly toward the balcony overlooking the estate grounds, though his pulse betrayed his composed appearance. Down below, among dozens of newly hired staff members, he saw a familiar woman helping a little girl adjust her tiny shoes before entering the servants' residence. Time seemed to stop. 3 years disappeared in an instant. Olivia looked older now, stronger somehow, carrying herself with quiet determination, yet Ethan recognized her immediately. The same gentle smile. The same eyes that had stayed with him every single day since the night of the storm. He whispered her name so quietly that no one nearby could hear it. Then his gaze shifted toward the child standing beside her. Something inside him stirred with a force he couldn't explain. The little girl looked no older than 3. She laughed as butterflies gathered around her, completely unaware that someone high above was staring at her with growing disbelief. Damien, Ethan's most trusted friend and head of security, quietly stepped onto the balcony after dismissing the meeting. He had never seen Ethan look shaken before, not during hostile takeovers, dangerous negotiations, or pack battles. Yet now his hands rested firmly against the stone railing as though he needed something solid to hold on to. Damien followed Ethan's line of sight until he noticed Olivia and the little girl disappearing toward the staff quarters. "Is it her?" he asked carefully. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes never left the path Olivia had taken. Finally, he nodded once. "I've found her." Damien released a long breath. For 3 years he had watched Ethan refuse every arranged relationship, reject every opportunity to move on, and personally finance search operations across multiple states, all because of one unforgettable woman from a single rainy night. Most people believed Ethan had become obsessed with an impossible memory. Damien never doubted him. He knew the bond between a wolf and his chosen mate couldn't simply disappear. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice lower than before. "She has a daughter." Damien glanced toward him, unsure why those 4 words carried so much weight. Ethan didn't explain what troubled him. He couldn't. Because deep inside, his wolf had already begun reaching a conclusion his human mind wasn't ready to accept. Olivia settled quickly into her new responsibilities. Martha, the elderly head housekeeper, welcomed her warmly and introduced her to the routines of the enormous estate. Every room seemed larger than the last, filled with priceless artwork, towering windows, polished wooden staircases, and elegant chandeliers that reflected sunlight across marble floors. Despite the mansion's beauty, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that someone was quietly watching her. Every time she turned around, the sensation disappeared. Martha noticed her uneasiness and smiled knowingly, explaining that most new employees felt overwhelmed during their first week because the house was so enormous. Olivia laughed politely, deciding not to mention how strangely familiar the estate felt despite never visiting before. She focused on learning her duties while arranging for Lily to stay in the estate's daycare center reserved for employees' children. Lily adjusted surprisingly well, charming nearly everyone she met within hours. Gardeners smiled whenever she waved. Kitchen staff secretly slipped her cookies. Even the estate's large guard dogs, known for intimidating strangers, became unusually gentle whenever she approached. One enormous black shepherd lowered itself onto the grass, allowing Lily to wrap tiny arms around its neck while giggling happily. The dog's handler stared in disbelief because that same animal trusted almost no one. Martha noticed it too, but quietly said nothing. Deep within the manor, old instincts had begun recognizing the little girl long before anyone understood why. Later that afternoon, Ethan reviewed security footage from every camera covering the estate grounds. His assistants believed he was inspecting safety procedures, but his attention remained fixed on Olivia. He watched her helping elderly staff members carry supplies instead of walking past them. He watched her comfort another employee who had accidentally broken an expensive vase, taking part of the blame herself to prevent the woman from losing her job. He watched her kneel beside Lily during lunch, wiping ice cream from her daughter's cheeks before kissing the top of her head. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he had smiled so naturally. The woman he remembered from the forest had become even kinder despite carrying burdens she never deserved. Yet one question refused to leave his mind. Why had she never tried to find him again? Had she truly believed he abandoned her? Or had something happened after that night that forced her to disappear? Every answer seemed possible, but none explained the little girl. Ethan paused the footage on a single frame showing Lily laughing beneath the garden trees. Her smile looked strangely familiar. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her cheeks, even the way sunlight reflected against her dark hair reminded him of someone he saw every morning in his own mirror. He leaned closer to the screen, studying every detail with growing unease before quietly calling Damien into his office. "Find out everything you can about Olivia Hart," Ethan instructed. "Leave no detail unchecked. I want to know where she's been these past 3 years, but no one is to frighten her or let her know she's being investigated." Damien nodded and immediately left. Ethan remained alone with the frozen image of the laughing child. His wolf had already accepted a truth his heart feared to hope for. If his instincts were right, destiny hadn't only returned his mate. It had quietly returned the family he never knew existed. As evening settled over Blackwood Manor, Olivia tucked Lily into bed inside the modest servant's cottage before stepping outside for a moment of fresh air. The moon hung bright above the towering trees surrounding the estate, casting silver light across the gardens. Lily suddenly stirred in her sleep. Moments later, tiny footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. Olivia turned just in time to see her sleepy daughter standing in the doorway rubbing her eyes. Before Olivia could pick her up, Lily tilted her head toward the forest and whispered softly, "Mommy, someone out there keeps calling me." Olivia looked toward the dark trees, but saw nothing except swaying branches. She smiled gently, believing her daughter had simply been dreaming, then carried her back inside without noticing 2 glowing blue eyes watching silently from the shadows beyond the garden wall. Ethan stood perfectly still beneath the ancient trees, hidden by darkness, unable to look away from the little girl who had unknowingly captured his heart from the moment he first saw her. He made himself one solemn promise before disappearing back into the night. This time, he would not lose Olivia again. And if the child truly belonged to him, nothing on earth would keep him from protecting both of them. Morning arrived with an unusual calm over Blackwood Manor, but beneath the peaceful routine, invisible tension had already begun weaving itself through every corridor of the estate. Olivia woke before sunrise, quietly preparing breakfast for Lily before beginning another long day of work. She kissed her daughter on the forehead, promised to return before dinner, and walked toward the main house, completely unaware that Ethan had barely slept. Throughout the night, he had replayed every security recording of Olivia and Lily, studying every smile, every laugh, every tiny expression. The closer he looked, the stronger the impossible truth became. Lily resembled him in ways no stranger's child ever could. Yet Ethan refused to let hope cloud his judgment. If he confronted Olivia too soon, and he was wrong, he could destroy the fragile chance fate had unexpectedly given him. For 3 years he had imagined thousands of different reunions, but none had prepared him for the reality of seeing her only a few rooms away while pretending she was simply another employee. His wolf urged him to claim her immediately, to tell the entire estate that his mate had finally returned, but Ethan knew Olivia deserved answers before declarations. She deserved the truth about why he disappeared that morning after the storm. More importantly, she deserved to choose whether she wanted him back in her life. While Olivia polished the grand staircase inside the mansion, Martha quietly approached her with a warm smile. "Mr. Blackwood is hosting an important dinner tonight," she explained. "Several business partners will be visiting, so every room must be perfect." Olivia nodded confidently and continued working, though she couldn't ignore the strange feeling that the owner's name sounded oddly familiar. She searched her memory but couldn't place it. Martha noticed Olivia staring thoughtfully toward a large portrait hanging above the fireplace. It showed a younger Ethan standing beside his late parents during a charity event years earlier. The painting captured him with shorter hair and a softer expression than the man he had become. Olivia studied the portrait for several seconds before shaking her head. "Have you met Mr. Blackwood?" Martha asked casually. Olivia smiled politely. "Not yet. Everyone keeps talking about him, but somehow we've never crossed paths." Martha found that difficult to believe. In a house this large, avoiding Ethan for several days almost seemed impossible. Still, she simply nodded and returned to supervising the other staff members. Neither woman realized that Ethan had been standing silently on the second-floor balcony above them the entire time. Hidden behind carved wooden railings, he watched Olivia pause beneath his portrait without recognizing the man she had once shared the most unforgettable night of her life with. For reasons he couldn't explain, that realization hurt far more than he expected. Later that afternoon, Lily wandered into the estate gardens while the daycare staff organized games for the children. She chased colorful butterflies between blooming roses until she reached a quiet section of the property where towering oak trees blocked out most of the sunlight. Sitting alone on a stone bench was Ethan, dressed simply in a dark sweater instead of his usual tailored suits. He had deliberately come there after learning that the children often played nearby. When Lily noticed him, she didn't hesitate or show even the slightest fear. She smiled brightly before walking straight toward him. "Hi," she said cheerfully. Ethan returned the smile without realizing how naturally it appeared. "Hello." Lily climbed onto the bench beside him as though they had known each other forever. She looked up into his eyes before asking a question that immediately stole his breath. "Why do you smell like me?" Ethan remained completely still. Wolves recognized one another through scent, but human children didn't ask questions like that. Lily tilted her head curiously. "Mommy smells like flowers," she continued. "You smell like the forest after rain." Ethan swallowed carefully, trying to steady his emotions. Before he could answer, Lily slipped her tiny hand into his. The instant their fingers touched, an overwhelming warmth surged through him. His wolf reacted instantly, filling him with certainty so powerful that no test, no evidence, and no explanation could ever convince him otherwise. This little girl carried his blood. Just then, one of the estate's largest guard dogs bounded happily across the lawn toward Lily. The daycare workers immediately panicked because the animal usually remained under strict supervision, but before anyone could intervene, something extraordinary happened. Instead of barking or jumping excitedly, the powerful dog slowly lowered its head before Lily as though greeting someone worthy of respect. It remained perfectly still until the little girl gently scratched behind its ears. Every employee watching the scene exchanged confused glances. Even Ethan struggled to hide his astonishment. Wolves naturally recognized members of their own bloodline, even when hidden beneath human appearances. The dog wasn't obeying a child. It was acknowledging the future heir of Blackwood Manor. Before Ethan could process what had just happened, Lily suddenly giggled and pointed toward the woods. "They're watching us again," she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze toward the distant trees. Hidden among the shadows stood several members of his pack disguised as hikers and groundskeepers. They had quietly positioned themselves nearby after sensing unusual energy surrounding the child. Ethan gave them an almost invisible signal to remain hidden. Lily looked back at him and smiled as though sharing a wonderful secret. "They don't have to hide," she said innocently. Ethan's heartbeat quickened once more. She shouldn't have been able to notice them from such a distance. Meanwhile, Damien's investigation had finally begun revealing pieces of Olivia's life during the past 3 years. He entered Ethan's private office carrying a thick folder before closing the door behind him. "I found everything," he said quietly. Ethan looked up immediately. Damien explained how Olivia had spent years working multiple jobs while raising Lily alone. She had never married. She had never dated anyone seriously. She had never accepted financial help from anyone. Hospital records confirmed Lily's birth date almost exactly 9 months after the night Ethan met Olivia in Blackwood Forest. There was no father's name listed on the birth certificate. Ethan slowly closed his eyes as emotion washed over him. Every sacrifice Olivia had made suddenly became painfully clear. She hadn't abandoned him. She believed he had abandoned her. Damien hesitated before revealing one final discovery. "There's something else," he said. Olivia returned to Blackwood Forest several times after that night. Witnesses remember seeing a young woman searching the hiking trails for months. Ethan lowered his head into his hands. The weight of those words struck harder than any battle he had ever fought. She had searched for him too. Both of them had spent years believing the other had disappeared forever while unknowingly carrying the same heartbreak. Ethan rose slowly from his chair and walked toward the window overlooking the gardens where Lily continued laughing among the flowers. His voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke. She never stopped looking. That evening, Blackwood Manor hosted one of its grandest charity galas of the year. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders, and influential families arrived beneath glittering chandeliers while live music echoed throughout the ballroom. Olivia and the housekeeping staff moved quietly among the guests, making sure everything remained flawless. She tried to stay invisible, just as she always did, but fate had other plans. As she stepped backward after arranging fresh flowers near the staircase, she accidentally collided with someone. The tray in her hands slipped forward. Crystal glasses shattered across the polished marble floor. A heavy silence spread through the room. Olivia looked up, her heart sinking as she found herself standing face to face with the owner of Blackwood Manor for the very first time. Ethan's blue eyes locked onto hers, and for several endless seconds, neither of them spoke. Olivia stared at the handsome billionaire, feeling an overwhelming sense of familiarity she couldn't explain. His face looked older than the man she remembered from the forest, his features sharper, his presence stronger, but there was something in his eyes that made her heart race exactly as it had 3 years earlier. Ethan looked at her with equal intensity, every emotion he had buried threatening to surface in front of hundreds of guests. Before Olivia could apologize for the accident, Ethan quietly bent down, picked up one unbroken crystal glass from the floor, placed it back onto the tray, and said with remarkable calm, "Be careful, Olivia." She froze instantly. She had never told him her name. Olivia stood motionless as the noise of the ballroom slowly returned around her, yet every sound felt distant, almost as though someone had lowered the volume of the entire world. Her fingers tightened around the silver tray while her heart pounded against her chest. The billionaire standing before her had spoken her name with complete certainty, even though they had never been introduced. She searched his face once more, trying desperately to remember where she had seen those piercing blue eyes before. Ethan maintained his composure, although every instinct inside him urged him to pull her into his arms and tell her that his search was finally over. Instead, he simply stepped aside, allowing the evening to continue without creating a scene. Olivia managed a quiet apology before walking away with trembling hands, but she couldn't shake the strange feeling growing inside her. She replayed his voice over and over in her mind while continuing her work, yet no matter how hard she tried, the memory remained just beyond her reach. Ethan watched her disappear into the crowd before turning toward Damien, who had witnessed everything from across the room. "She still doesn't remember me," Ethan said softly. Damien looked at his friend with sympathy before replying, 3 years can change a person's face, but heartbreak changes what people choose to remember. Give her time." Ethan nodded, though patience had already become the hardest battle of his life. The following morning, Olivia found herself assigned to clean the private west wing of the mansion, an area reserved almost exclusively for Ethan himself. Martha explained that very few employees were allowed inside those rooms because the owner valued his privacy above everything else. Olivia accepted the assignment without hesitation, determined to prove she deserved the opportunity she had been given. As she dusted the bookshelves inside Ethan's enormous library, her eyes wandered across countless photographs displayed on the fireplace mantel. Most showed Ethan attending charity events, business meetings, and family celebrations. Then one particular photograph caught her attention. It had been taken several years earlier. Ethan stood beside a forest ranger during a conservation fundraiser held near Blackwood Forest. He looked younger, his hair shorter, his smile warmer. Olivia slowly picked up the frame, staring at it as fragments of forgotten memories rushed back into her mind. The rain, the cabin, the firelight reflecting in kind blue eyes, the gentle smile that had made her believe love could exist after all. Her breathing became uneven as realization slowly settled over her. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." At that exact moment, the library door quietly opened behind her. Ethan stepped inside, stopping only a few feet away. Olivia turned toward him, still holding the photograph with trembling hands. Neither spoke for several long seconds. Then Ethan finally broke the silence with words he had waited 3 years to say. "I never stopped looking for you." The photograph slipped from Olivia's hands onto the thick carpet below. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "It was you," she whispered, almost unable to breathe. Ethan nodded once. "I came back to the cabin that morning, but you were already gone." Olivia stared at him in complete disbelief. "I thought you left me." Ethan slowly shook his head. "A fight broke out nearby that night. I believed you would still be asleep when I returned. By the time I came back, the storm had erased every trace of where you went." Olivia covered her mouth as every painful memory returned all at once. She told him about returning to the forest week after week hoping to find him again. She confessed how she searched online without even knowing his last name. Ethan listened quietly before revealing his own search. He described hiring investigators across multiple states, checking hospitals, shelters, airports, hotels, and public records. He admitted that every business trip became another excuse to keep searching. "I looked for you everywhere," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "Every city I entered, every crowd I walked through, I hoped I'd see you again." Olivia's tears flowed freely now because the truth was even more heartbreaking than she had imagined. Neither of them had walked away willingly. They had simply spent 3 years searching different roads for the same destination. Before either of them could say another word, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway outside the library. Martha burst through the doorway, struggling to catch her breath. "Miss Hart, it's Lily." Olivia's face immediately drained of color. Without waiting for another explanation, she rushed out of the room with Ethan close behind. They reached the estate gardens within seconds, where dozens of employees stood frozen in stunned silence. At the center of the lawn stood little Lily, surrounded by butterflies beneath the enormous oak tree where she loved to play. Olivia called her daughter's name, but Lily didn't respond. Instead, the little girl looked toward the forest with curious excitement. A gentle breeze swept through the garden. Suddenly, Lily's tiny body became surrounded by shimmering silver light. Olivia stopped running as disbelief rooted her to the ground. The light faded only moments later. Standing where her daughter had been was a tiny silver and black wolf cub with bright blue eyes. The cub looked around playfully before trotting across the grass toward Ethan. Every member of the Blackwood pack instinctively lowered their heads in silent respect. Olivia couldn't move. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes clearly saw. The tiny wolf reached Ethan's feet before transforming back into Lily, who wrapped both arms around his legs and smiled innocently. "See?" she giggled. "I told Mommy someone kept calling me." Olivia stared at Ethan with tears streaming down her face. Every impossible moment from the past 3 years suddenly made sense. The strange paw prints, the glowing eyes, the animals that trusted Lily without question. Ethan slowly knelt before his daughter, gently brushing a tear from her tiny cheek before looking back at Olivia. "She's ours," he said quietly. "Lily carries my blood and my wolf." Olivia struggled to find words as the world she believed she understood disappeared forever. Ethan rose to his feet before stepping closer to her. "I know this is frightening," he said gently, "but I will explain everything. I won't keep another secret from you. Not anymore." Olivia searched his eyes, seeing honesty instead of fear, love instead of control, and regret instead of excuses. She finally realized that the man she had loved beneath the rain-soaked trees 3 years earlier had never stopped loving her. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Ethan held her carefully, as though afraid she might disappear again if he embraced her too tightly. After 3 years of unanswered questions, missed chances, and lonely nights, they finally found themselves exactly where they had always belonged, in each other's arms, with their daughter laughing happily between them as though she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Before we continue this unforgettable journey, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because although Olivia had finally discovered the truth about Ethan and their daughter, an even greater challenge was quietly approaching Blackwood Manor. News that the king's lost mate and hidden heir had returned would spread far beyond the estate walls, reaching powerful enemies who believed the Blackwood bloodline should end forever. Some would stop at nothing to separate this family before they could truly become one. And as Ethan looked toward the distant forest surrounding his home, he sensed something watching from beyond the trees. This time, however, he wasn't facing the danger alone. He had finally found the two people worth risking everything to protect, and anyone who threatened them would soon learn exactly why the name Blackwood was spoken with respect throughout every wolf pack in the country. For the first time since the storm had brought them together 3 years earlier, Olivia finally stopped running from the questions that had haunted her every single day. She stood on the terrace overlooking Blackwood Manor as the evening sky slowly darkened, still trying to process everything she had witnessed only hours before. Lily had transformed into a tiny wolf cub before changing back into a laughing little girl as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Every belief Olivia had carried throughout her life had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. Ethan quietly joined her without saying a word. He knew she needed answers, not pressure. After several moments of silence, Olivia finally looked at him. "Tell me everything," she whispered. Ethan nodded before leading her into a private sitting room deep inside the West Wing, a place few people besides Damien had ever entered. The room was filled with centuries-old books, family portraits, and journals carefully preserved behind glass. Ethan poured 2 cups of tea before taking a slow breath. "Everything I'm about to tell you is the truth," he began. "Whether you believe it today or not, I won't hide anything from you again." Olivia listened as Ethan revealed the history of the Blackwood bloodline, explaining that his family had protected the existence of werewolves for generations by living quietly among humans while keeping their true identities hidden. They built businesses, hospitals, charities, and schools, becoming respected members of society without ever exposing what they truly were. Ethan wasn't simply the head of a successful company. He was the Alpha King chosen to unite dozens of wolf packs across North America, carrying responsibilities far greater than wealth or influence. Olivia remained silent throughout the explanation, but the sincerity in Ethan's voice made it impossible to dismiss him as delusional. Every impossible event she had witnessed suddenly fit together, like missing pieces of a puzzle she never realized she had been solving. As the night continued, Ethan opened one of the oldest journals on the shelf and placed it gently before Olivia. Inside were handwritten records spanning hundreds of years, documenting families whose children had inherited both human and wolf forms. There were sketches remarkably similar to the tiny silver and black cub Lily had become that afternoon. Ethan explained that children born from a human parent and a wolf parent often discovered their abilities naturally during early childhood, especially when they felt strong emotions such as joy, fear, or excitement. Olivia remembered every unusual moment Lily had experienced since birth. The glowing eyes during thunderstorms. The strange connection with animals. The tiny paw prints that mysteriously appeared around her bed. Tears quietly filled Olivia's eyes as she realized none of those moments had been her imagination. Ethan gently reached across the table and took her hand. "None of this is your fault," he said softly. "You protected Lily with everything you had, even without knowing what she truly was. That's exactly what any loving mother would have done." Olivia looked into his eyes and saw no judgment, only admiration. For the first time in years, The weight she had carried alone began to feel lighter. She admitted how terrified she had been raising Lily without answers, constantly wondering whether she was somehow failing as a mother. Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You gave our daughter everything she needed," he replied. "Love, safety, kindness. I can never repay you for that." Those words reached deeper than Olivia expected. She realized Ethan wasn't trying to take Lily away from her. He wanted to become part of the family she had spent 3 years building. Meanwhile, the joyful reunion inside Blackwood Manor did not remain secret for long. Several hundred miles away, hidden within another ancient estate surrounded by mountains, a council of rival alphas received alarming news from one of their informants. The Blackwood King's lost mate had returned. More shocking still, she had brought with her a 3-year-old daughter carrying the direct bloodline of the Alpha King himself. Around a long stone table, silence settled over the gathering. Some leaders exchanged uneasy glances while others looked openly disturbed. Ethan had ruled wisely for years, but his greatest weakness had always been the absence of an heir. Without one, many believed future leadership could eventually be challenged. Now everything had changed overnight. One elderly alpha quietly folded his hands before saying, "If the child survives to adulthood, the Blackwood line becomes stronger than ever." Across the room, another man slowly stood. His name was Victor Ashcroft, leader of one of the oldest rival packs in the country. Unlike Ethan, Victor believed power should be earned through fear instead of loyalty. A slow smile crossed his face. "Then we simply make sure the child never reaches adulthood." No one answered him, but the silence itself revealed that some around the table were willing to consider the unthinkable. The decision made that evening would quietly place Olivia, Ethan, and Lily in greater danger than any of them could imagine. Back at Blackwood Manor, life appeared almost peaceful on the surface. Ethan insisted that Olivia and Lily move into the main residence where they would be safer than the servants' cottages. Olivia hesitated at first, worried about what the staff might think, but Martha simply smiled and assured her that everyone already adored Lily. The little girl adjusted quickly to the enormous mansion, treating every hallway like a new adventure. She especially loved exploring the vast library, where Ethan often found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by books far too large for her tiny hands. One afternoon, he watched quietly as Lily attempted to read one of the old journals before looking up at him with complete innocence. "Daddy," she asked, testing the unfamiliar word for the first time. Ethan froze. Olivia, standing nearby, covered her mouth as tears immediately filled her eyes. Lily smiled shyly before repeating it. "Daddy, can you read this with me?" Ethan crossed the room in seconds, gently lifting his daughter into his arms. He had imagined hearing that word countless times during the lonely years he spent searching for Olivia, but reality surpassed every dream. His voice trembled slightly as he answered, "I'd love to." Olivia watched father and daughter curl up together in one of the large reading chairs, laughing over a book neither of them truly cared about because they were simply enjoying finally being together. In that quiet moment, Blackwood Manor no longer felt like a lonely estate built for a king. It finally felt like a home. As days turned into weeks, Ethan and Olivia slowly rediscovered the connection that had begun during the storm 3 years earlier. They shared breakfast with Lily every morning, walked together through the gardens in the evenings, and spoke honestly about the years they had lost. Ethan apologized again and again for not finding her sooner, while Olivia admitted she had spent too long convincing herself that she wasn't worthy of being loved after he disappeared. One evening, they returned to the same forest where they had first met. The abandoned cabin still stood beneath the towering pines, untouched by time. Ethan quietly pushed open the old wooden door, smiling as memories came rushing back. Olivia stepped inside beside him, running her fingers across the fireplace where they had laughed together on that unforgettable night. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Words weren't necessary anymore. Ethan gently cupped Olivia's face before leaning forward and kissing her with the same tenderness that had first stolen her heart years earlier. This kiss carried no uncertainty, no fear of tomorrow, and no unanswered questions. It was a promise. A promise that neither of them would ever walk away without looking back again. Hidden beyond the trees, however, another pair of eyes watched the cabin in complete silence. Victor Ashcroft's scout had finally located Blackwood's greatest treasure. By the time the moon rose above the forest, the first step of a dangerous plan was already underway, and neither Ethan nor Olivia knew that the peaceful future they had only just begun to rebuild was about to face its greatest test. The peaceful days that followed felt almost unreal to Olivia. For the first time in 3 years, she no longer carried every burden alone. Blackwood Manor echoed with Lily's laughter from sunrise until evening, and every member of the household slowly accepted what Ethan had already known in his heart from the moment he saw the little girl in the gardens. She belonged there. She belonged with him. Every morning, Ethan made time for breakfast no matter how demanding his schedule became. Every evening, he walked through the estate with Olivia and Lily, determined to create the memories they had been robbed of during those lost years. Olivia often caught herself watching Ethan from across the room, still amazed that the mysterious man she had met in the forest had become the devoted father Lily deserved. He wasn't perfect. He remained fiercely protective, sometimes refusing to let Lily wander farther than a few feet from him, and he quietly doubled the estate's security without explaining why. Olivia teased him about worrying too much, but Ethan never laughed whenever the subject came up. His instincts had protected his people for years, and lately those instincts refused to settle. He could feel danger moving closer, even if he couldn't yet see where it would come from. He spent every night standing alone on the highest balcony of Blackwood Manor, watching the forest surrounding the estate, convinced that someone was watching them from the darkness. His fears proved correct only days later. Just before sunrise, the estate alarms silently activated. Damien immediately rushed into Ethan's office carrying a security tablet. Someone crossed the northern boundary during the night, he reported. Ethan studied the surveillance footage carefully. A hooded figure had slipped through the forest before disappearing moments later, moving with impossible speed no ordinary human could match. The cameras captured only a brief silhouette before the intruder vanished completely. Damien enlarged the image several times before quietly saying, "This wasn't random. Whoever entered the estate knew exactly where our patrols were positioned." Ethan's expression hardened instantly. "Victor." Damien nodded. There was no need to explain further. Ethan ordered every member of his security team to remain alert while making one thing absolutely clear. Under no circumstances was Olivia or Lily to learn that someone had already entered the property. He wanted them to enjoy the happiness they had only recently found without living in constant fear. Yet secrets had a way of revealing themselves when least expected. Later that afternoon, while playing hide-and-seek in the gardens, Lily wandered farther into the woods than anyone realized. She laughed as butterflies floated ahead of her, completely unaware that another pair of eyes had quietly begun following her every step from behind the trees. Before the stranger could move any closer, a deep growl echoed through the forest. Ethan, now fully transformed into his massive black wolf, emerged from the shadows with such overwhelming presence that even the birds scattered from the branches above. The hooded intruder immediately retreated into the forest without looking back. Ethan didn't chase him. Protecting Lily mattered far more than revenge. That evening, Ethan finally told Olivia everything about Victor Ashcroft and the growing threat against their family. Olivia listened without interrupting as Ethan explained how rival alpha leaders feared the strength of the Blackwood bloodline now that Lily had been revealed as his daughter. "They won't stop because of money," Ethan admitted. "They'll stop because they believe removing our family will weaken the future of this pack." Olivia slowly looked toward Lily, who had fallen asleep beside the fireplace with one of her favorite storybooks resting across her lap. The thought of anyone wanting to harm such an innocent child filled her with quiet determination rather than fear. She turned back toward Ethan and took both of his hands. "I've spent 3 years protecting our daughter by myself," she said softly. "I'm not afraid to keep protecting her with you." Ethan looked into her eyes and saw the same courage that had first drawn him to her beneath the storm 3 years earlier. Without another word, he gently kissed her forehead before resting his own against hers. "You'll never have to stand alone again," he promised. It wasn't simply a romantic promise. It was the oath of a father, a mate, and a king who had finally found the family he thought he had lost forever. Days later, Blackwood Manor welcomed representatives from wolf packs across the country for a ceremony unlike any held in generations. One by one, respected alphas entered the Great Hall, each acknowledging Ethan's leadership and formally recognizing Lily as the rightful heir of the Blackwood bloodline. Olivia stood proudly beside Ethan wearing an elegant midnight blue gown, still amazed by how dramatically her life had changed. Only weeks earlier she had been searching desperately for steady work to provide for her daughter. Now she stood beside the man she loved while holding the hand of the little girl who had unknowingly united two worlds. During the ceremony, Lily looked around curiously before spotting dozens of wolves gathered peacefully outside the grand windows. She smiled brightly and waved. To everyone's surprise, every wolf wagged its tail in response before lowering its head toward the little girl. Laughter quietly spread through the hall. Even the oldest alphas smiled at the touching sight. One elderly woman stepped forward before saying, "Kindness has always been the greatest strength of a true leader. Today, we have witnessed the future." Olivia felt tears gather in her eyes as Ethan gently wrapped an arm around her shoulders. For the first time since the storm that had changed everything, she finally believed their future belonged together. Months passed, and peace gradually returned to Blackwood Manor. Victor Ashcroft's attempted schemes were exposed before he could gather enough support to challenge Ethan's rule. Several rival packs chose unity over conflict after witnessing the love and loyalty that surrounded the Blackwood family. Instead of ruling through fear, Ethan continued leading with fairness, earning even greater respect than before. Olivia transformed one wing of the estate into a children's learning center for employees' families, believing every child deserved the same love and opportunities she wanted for Lily. The project quickly became one of Ethan's proudest achievements, and together they funded similar programs throughout the country. Lily continued learning how to balance both sides of her identity, growing more confident each day under Ethan's patient guidance. Sometimes she played in the gardens as an energetic little girl. Other times she raced joyfully through the forests as a playful silver and black wolf cub, always returning home before sunset with the biggest smile on her face. Every evening ended the same way. The family gathered together on the terrace overlooking Blackwood Forest, watching the sun disappear behind the trees where fate had first brought two strangers together on a stormy night. Olivia often smiled at Ethan before saying she still couldn't believe one wrong turn had changed her entire life. Ethan always gave the same answer. "It wasn't the wrong path. It was the only path that could ever have led me to you." And so, the story that began with two strangers seeking shelter from a storm became the story of a family that weathered heartbreak, distance, unanswered questions, and impossible truths without losing hope. Olivia believed she had been forgotten, while Ethan believed he had lost the only woman his heart would ever choose. Yet love refused to disappear simply because time passed. It waited patiently until the right moment to bring them together again through the laughter of a little girl who carried both of their worlds within her. Blackwood Manor was no longer remembered as the lonely home of a mysterious billionaire hidden behind ancient walls. It became known as the place where a king found his queen, where a father found his daughter, and where a family discovered that the strongest bond is not created by power, wealth, or destiny alone, but by choosing one another every single day. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and tell us which moment was your favorite. Would you have stayed after discovering the man you fell in love with was secretly a werewolf king, or would you have walked away? We'd love to read your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable romance. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a single unexpected meeting, but they become unforgettable because two people refuse to stop searching for each other, no matter how many years stand between them.